Hi everyone, welcome to my new channel, The Beauty of Books, where we explore how reading great works of literature can transform your life. My name is Ben, and I am a lifelong reader and lover of great literature. My intention with this channel is to explore great works of literature, and great works can range from anything from children's literature to Russian novels that are hundreds of thousands of words or longer. So there's no classism here. Great works are any works that I've personally found meaningful and transformational in my life. Anything that I can make an argument for why I think this should be included in the canon that is going to help transform your life and help you live a more meaningful and intentional life. So we're going to kick things off by taking a look at Le Petit Prince, or The Little Prince, written by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Now, this is an amazing novel. It's a classic. It's one of the great works of children's literature. But to be honest, it's not even really children's literature. I think this is a novel for adults who have forgotten that they were once children. That's really what it comes down to, I think, when we really dig deep and we look at what the Little Prince is really about. Now, the cool thing about The Little Prince is it's almost as interesting, just the biographical details of Saint-Exupéry, as the actual novel itself. So basically, this novel was written in the context of a man who is in exile from his homeland. He's a Frenchman. Saint-Exupéry was born into a Catholic aristocratic family, many generations of nobility and wealth, and he was an aviator from a young age. All right. After his career in aviation, he fought along the side of the French in the beginning of the Second World War, and when the collaborationist regime in Vichy France came and allowed basically the Nazis to take over, he went into exile in America. But he also fought with the Free French Army, and he was a pilot. In 1944, his plane disappeared, and no one knows what happened to him. In 1988, decades later, some wreckage was found that, they think is very much his wreckage, but it's still a bit of a mystery exactly what happened to Saint-Exupéry. But one thing we know for sure is that before his mysterious disappearance, he wrote a wonderful and timeless novel, The Little Prince. I have a copy right here. This one's in French, but it was originally written in French, and the English translation is amazing as well. So read it in English or French or whatever language you prefer. The Little Prince is a book you absolutely have to read. The basic premise of The Little Prince, in terms of summary, is a pilot. And this is a funny thing, right? Because we talked about the biographical details. There's a lot of weird resonances here. But it's a pilot basically who crashes in a desert. And in the desert, this pilot meets a mysterious young man called the Little Prince. The Little Prince tells him about his journey and his stories, all the things that happened to him as he went away from his planet B612. I think it's B612. It's B16212, whatever. His planet, which is really an asteroid that he was living on. And the Little Prince left and he traveled to all these other places and eventually found himself on Earth where he meets this pilot and he's telling the story. Along the way, he met a lot of very interesting characters, and each character essentially represents a certain kind of human foolishness. So you have the king as an example. Now, the king is this guy on this planet who wants majesty and power and he wants to be worshipped essentially. The little prince kind of has no time for this because he's an independent free thinker. He's like, this is strange. Um, he goes to another planet and he meets a businessman. Now, the businessman is obsessed with counting, right? The businessman is counting all the stars and saying, because he counted them, he owns them. And the little prince is saying, well, that's ridiculous. Just because you counted the stars doesn't give you any sense of ownership over them. He goes to another planet, and he meets other figures essentially that are representative of these very, recognizable kinds of human foolishness that we notice in adults. He meets a geographer who's never left his bench, right? He's spent his whole time, basically mapping, and he's never been anywhere, right? And so the little prince is just meeting all these people, and he's like, he's the voice of reason, but they're the adults, right? So they're looking down on him, being like, "You're just a kid, you don't really understand." But really, he's the one who's saying, what you guys are doing makes absolutely no sense. And to be honest, the theme that is all throughout this novel is really that kind of it's a novel of absurdism to a certain degree, right? Saint-Exupéry is kind of exploring this idea of as we become adults, how we forget some of the magic that we saw in the world as children, and some of the simple, the genius that can exist in simplicity, right? And we're losing the plot. And that's what's happening to each of these characters that the little prince meets along his journey. They've all lost the plot. They're all kind of drift drifting and forgetting that there are important things to life outside of just counting the stars and saying that you own them. Or the vain man who says, he wants applause, or the lamplighter who's just lighting the lamp again and again and again, kind of this repetitive monotony. It's totally Kafkaesque. It's like it's a great envoy into absurdism. But beyond that, The Little Prince is not just a book of absurdism. It's also a book of great, deep, profound moral heart, moral depth. Um, there's a moral core to the story, and that really starts getting explored when we get down to earth. And I think that's totally appropriate. So what happens is when the little prince arrives on Earth and he meets with the pilot who's crashed his plane. Before this, he's meeting up earthly characters for the first time. One of these characters is a fox. Now, the fox character is really beautiful because the theme of the fox essentially is you become responsible forever for what you've tamed. That's one of the lines from the novel. The idea that love is the bond of responsibility. That when you love something, you become responsible for it. And that is exactly what happens with the fox. The little prince meets the fox and he develops a relationship. It's not just an emotion, it's duty for this fox. And this sense of responsibility for the fox's well-being kind of comes out of that relationship naturally. Another really interesting experience happens when the little prince goes to a field with roses. So on his planet, the little prince has a few things. He has a sheep and he has a rose. He's asking for a box or a muzzle so that he can, like, he wants a drawing of a box or a muzzle from the pilot, so that he can put that on his sheep so that the sheep won't eat the rose, right? That's kind of uh, to keep them separate, right? But one of the things he knows is that he has this rose and he loves this rose. And so, for example, when the little prince meets the businessman who says, I have all of these stars, he says, well, I have a rose. And the businessman laughs and says, what's a rose? It's nothing. And so the little prince, like all of us, I think pushes on and says, you know what? I don't know. I don't know what it is with all these stars and all these numbers. It's kind of like, when in the modern world, you have something you love, a passion, and somebody else is telling you, well, you got to do this and you got to make money and and you're like, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of, so I got to make sure I have the house and make sure I have the car and make sure I have and there's all these things that you need or ostensibly need, right? And the little prince, with his childish heart, just says, I don't want those things. I don't care about those things. What I care about is my rose. I have a rose. But when he gets down to earth, he sees a whole garden full of thousands of roses. And this is a really important inflection point in the novel, a kind of a demoralization. And the question there is, when we see roses, right? When we realize the one love that we have is just one in 1,000, does that diminish our sense of love for the one thing that we actually have, the one thing we actually love? And that's another interesting question in this novel, right? The Little Prince gets around this by kind of understanding, in one of the most famous lines, the things that matter are invisible to the eyes. They're the things that you see with the heart, kind of thing. And that I think is really the moral core of The Little Prince. Le Petit Prince is about finding meaning, even amidst the absurdity that we see all around us. It's a short book. It's really, really beautiful. And it is a children's book, but really it's a book I think every adult needs to read because it's a book that reminds us that there are certain things we forgot, certain things we've forgotten about childhood, certain truths that we knew as children that we don't necessarily know as adults, or we don't necessarily embody as adults. Some of these truths include the idea that meaning can be found not just in material possessions, but in small things like a rose or a moment. Another component of this is that I think people that tend to overcomplicate things, make things super abstract, sometimes that's because they don't understand the core, right? And the Little Prince, all throughout the novel, he's asking direct questions, questions that on the face seem a little bit silly. But when you really stop and think about it, it's like, that's a good question. Why is that the case? How can I get around that? Can I? And that's really what it comes down to. I think the reason you should read The Little Prince is because it's a story that helps you make sense of the vicissitudes of life, the challenges through the eyes of a child. Now, there are a lot of great novels, great children's novels. The Wind in the Willows is another one I have right there that's a fantastic kids novel that's really worth reading as an adult. But in particular, The Little Prince is almost a children's book written for adults. Like it's very much the kind of novel you read to your kids. And then every rereading of this novel, you get something else out of it. And that's what's been my experience reading the Little Prince throughout the years. It's a novel I come back to. It's a novel I reflect upon regularly. And it's a novel I hope to read in the future many more times and glean much more from it and learn a lot more from it. If this is the kind of novel that you'd be interested in going deeper, learning more about The Little Prince, maybe I'll do a longer video at some time in the future, really delving deep into the background, the biographical details of Saint-Exupéry, some of the metaphorical resonances of this book, and why it was so impactful in my life. But The Little Prince is the first novel on my list of novels that I'm recommending. So, welcome again to the beauty of books. I hope that you guys will continue to join me as we journey through looking at some of the great works of literature, some of the novels that have influenced my life, and explore the future of literature. Thank you.